Millionaire was fired for losing $1.5 billion from the company until a poor 8-year-old girl walked into the meeting and revealed the truth that left everyone silent. Before we share this touching account of despair and solitude, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more powerful stories. The mahogany door slammed shut behind Marcus Wellington as he stumbled into the marble-floored hallway of Grandview Financial Tower. His hands trembled as he loosened his silk tie, the weight of what had just transpired crushing down on his broad shoulders like an avalanche. The scent of expensive leather and polished wood that usually comforted him now seemed suffocating. $1.5 billion, he whispered to himself, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. Gone. At 42 years old, Marcus had built his reputation as one of Wall Street's most brilliant minds. His corner office on the 52nd floor overlooked Central Park, and his investment strategies had made Grandview Financial billions over the past decade. His Harvard MBA hung proudly on the wall next to awards from Financial Times and Forbes. But today, everything had crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The emergency board meeting had been brutal. 12 pairs of eyes staring at him across the polished conference table, their faces etched with disbelief and fury. Chairman Robert Ashford's voice had cut through the air like a blade. Marcus, how do you explain losing $1.5 billion in a single trade? The numbers danced mockingly in his mind. The Shanghai Steel Corporation deal that should have been foolproof. The contracts he'd reviewed personally, spending hours analyzing every clause and contingency. The signatures that had seemed legitimate, verified through 3 separate authentication systems. Everything had been perfect until the wire transfer disappeared into what appeared to be a ghost account that materialized and vanished within hours. His phone buzzed against his chest. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, accompanied by a photo of her radiant smile from their anniversary last month. His wife of 15 years, probably calling about their daughter Emma's piano recital tonight. How could he tell them that their world was about to collapse, that the house in the Hamptons, Emma's private school tuition, their entire life built on his success was now hanging by a thread? Marcus pressed his back against the cold marble wall, feeling the first tears he'd shed in 20 years burning his eyes. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with portraits of the company's founding fathers and motivational quotes about success and integrity. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, the board would reconvene for the final vote. His termination was all but guaranteed, and with it would come the lawsuits, the SEC investigations, and the complete destruction of everything he'd worked for since graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Business School 20 years ago. But deep in his gut, something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. The timing seemed too convenient, the complexity of the scheme too sophisticated for a simple mistake. The way certain board members had seemed almost too prepared for this moment, their questions too pointed, their accusations too rehearsed. As he stood there in that empty hallway, Marcus Wellington made a silent vow that would change everything. He would find out who had really stolen those $1.5 billion, even if it cost him everything he had left. The elevator dinged softly, and Marcus straightened his shoulders with newfound determination. Emma Wellington pressed her small face against the kitchen window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched her father's black Mercedes pull into their circular driveway. At 8 years old, she had developed an unusual ability to read the worry lines on adults' faces, a skill that came from being the daughter of one of New York's most high-pressure executives. The autumn leaves scattered across their manicured lawn reminded her that Thanksgiving was approaching. But something in her father's posture as he stepped out of the car made her stomach twist with anxiety. "Daddy's home," she called to her mother, but the words came out smaller than she intended. Sarah Wellington looked up from the granite island where she'd been arranging canapes for the evening's dinner party. At 39, she still maintained the elegant beauty that had first caught Marcus's eye during their college years at Harvard. But lately, the stress of his demanding career had begun to show in the fine lines around her green eyes. Her auburn hair, the same shade as Emma's, was pulled back in a sophisticated chignon that spoke of years navigating New York's social circles. "How was school, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, smoothing Emma's auburn curls as the little girl climbed onto the bar stool beside her. The kitchen smelled of fresh flowers and the vanilla candles Sarah always lit before entertaining. "Mrs. Patterson taught us about honesty today," Emma said, her voice unusually serious for a second grader. "She said sometimes telling the truth can save people from big trouble, even when it's scary to speak up." The front door opened with a heavy thud, and Marcus entered with footsteps that seemed to carry the weight of the world. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled, his Italian silk tie askew, his custom-tailored shirt wrinkled, and dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there when he'd kissed them goodbye that morning at 7:30 sharp. "Hey, princess," he said, forcing a smile as he kissed Emma's forehead. The gesture felt hollow, automatic, like he was going through the motions of being a father while his mind remained trapped in that boardroom. Sarah caught his eye over Emma's head, her expression questioning. They had developed their own silent language over 15 years of marriage, a way of communicating complex emotions and concerns without alarming their perceptive daughter. Tonight that language was screaming alarm bells. "The Hendersons are still coming for dinner at 7, right?" Sarah asked carefully, her tone neutral but her eyes searching his face for clues. Marcus's jaw tightened involuntarily. James Henderson was a fellow board member at Grandview Financial, and the dinner had been planned 3 weeks ago to discuss Emma's admission to the exclusive Briarfield Academy. Now, the thought of sitting across from someone who would likely vote for his termination tomorrow made his chest constrict with anxiety. "About that," Marcus began, but Emma interrupted with the directness that only children possess. "Daddy, why do you look so sad? Did something bad happen at your work? Your face looks like when Grandpa got sick." The innocent comparison hit him like a physical blow. Marcus knelt down to her eye level, studying the concerned expression on his daughter's face. She had always been remarkably perceptive, often picking up on emotional undercurrents that other children her age missed entirely. It was both a blessing and a curse, having a daughter who could read him so easily. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Grandview Financial boardroom as Marcus Wellington straightened his tie for what he was certain would be the last time as an employee of the firm. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp, giving him exactly 43 minutes to prepare for his professional execution. The October morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that usually filled him with optimism about the markets and opportunities ahead. Today, it felt like nature mocking his impending doom. He'd spent the sleepless night poring over every document related to the Shanghai steel deal, searching for any clue that might explain how $1.5 billion had simply vanished into thin air. The wire transfer had been authorized with his credentials, routed through his personal access codes, and executed during a time when security cameras could place him definitively at his desk. The digital trail led directly to him, like a neon sign pointing to his guilt. The evidence was damning and seemingly irrefutable, crafted with a precision that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge of the company's systems. Chairman Robert Ashford arrived early, his silver hair impeccably styled despite the early hour. At 68, Ashford commanded respect through decades of building Grandview Financial from a modest investment firm into a Wall Street powerhouse worth over $50 billion. His weathered face, lined with years of high-stakes decisions, showed no emotion as he nodded curtly to Marcus. "Good morning, Marcus. I trust you've had time to consider your position and perhaps prepare a statement." "I've considered many things, Robert," Marcus replied evenly, his voice steadier than he felt, "including how remarkably convenient the timing of this disaster seems to be, coinciding perfectly with my planned vacation week." Ashford's eyebrows raised slightly. The first crack in his professional facade. "Convenient?" I hardly think losing $1.5 billion could be considered convenient for anyone involved, especially not for our shareholders. Other board members began filtering into the room like mourners at a funeral. Patricia Chen, the sharp-eyed CFO with her trademark red power suit. David Morrison, head of international operations, nervously adjusting his glasses. Elizabeth Harper, chief compliance officer, carrying a thick file that Marcus suspected contained his death warrant, and 6 others whose faces had become increasingly hostile over the past 24 hours. Marcus took his usual seat at the polished table, acutely aware that it would likely be the last time he sat in this chair that had been his throne for a decade. The leather felt different today, less comfortable, as if it already knew he didn't belong. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma insists on coming to your office after school, says she has something important to tell you about your work. I couldn't talk her out of it. She's been acting strange since yesterday, asking questions about your computer and papers. The irony wasn't lost on him. His 8-year-old daughter wanted to visit his office on the very day he was about to lose it forever. Before we begin the formal proceedings, Ashford announced, his voice carrying the authority of decades in boardrooms, Marcus, would you like to offer any explanation for yesterday's catastrophic loss? Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing through the fragments of evidence that didn't quite fit together like pieces from different puzzles. The Shanghai Steel executives who had suddenly become unreachable after years of reliable communication, the backup authentication systems that had mysteriously failed at the exact moment they were needed most. Emma Wellington had never been inside her father's office building without him, but today felt different in a way that made her small heart beat faster. Today felt important in a way that her 8-year-old mind couldn't fully articulate, like the feeling she got before thunderstorms when the air became heavy and electric. As she rode the elevator to the 52nd floor with her mother, she clutched a manila folder against her chest like a shield, her knuckles white with determination. "Are you sure you want to do this, sweetheart?" Sarah asked for the 4th time, smoothing her daughter's navy blue school uniform with nervous fingers. "Daddy's in a very important meeting with some very serious grown-ups." "Mrs. Patterson says, when you see something wrong, you have to speak up," Emma replied, with the determined conviction that only children possess, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Even if adults don't want to listen, even if it's scary." The elevator dinged softly as they reached the executive floor, and Emma's eyes widened as they always did when she visited Daddy's work. The marble hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, lined with abstract paintings worth more than most people's houses and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering breathtaking views of Manhattan that made her feel like she was flying. Sarah approached the reception desk, where Margaret Kim, Marcus's longtime assistant, looked up with surprise. Margaret had worked for the company for 23 years and had seen many crises come and go. Market crashes, hostile takeovers, executive scandals, but nothing quite like the situation unfolding today. "Mrs. Wellington, I didn't expect to see you today. Mr. Wellington is still in the board meeting, and I'm afraid it's quite serious. They've been in there since 9 this morning." "I know," Sarah said quietly, her voice tight with worry. "But Emma has been insisting all day that she needs to see him. She says it's about his work, and she found something important at home." Margaret glanced down at the little girl, who was staring intently at the closed boardroom doors 50 feet away through the glass walls. Emma had visited the office many times over the years, usually bringing her father forgotten lunch or surprising him with crayon drawings for his desk that he displayed proudly next to his Harvard diploma. But today her expression was different, focused and determined in a way that seemed far beyond her years, like a tiny detective on an important case. "They've been in there for over 3 hours, Margaret whispered, leaning closer. "The vote is supposed to happen any minute. I've never seen the board so upset." Through the glass walls of the boardroom, they could see the silhouettes of 12 board members seated around the massive mahogany table, like judges at a tribunal. Marcus sat at one end, his shoulders rigid with tension, while Chairman Ashford stood at the head of the table, apparently delivering what looked like a formal statement with the gravity of a funeral director. Emma stepped forward, her small hands pressed against the cool glass, leaving tiny fingerprints that caught the afternoon light. "Mommy, I need to go in there right now. Sweetheart, we can't interrupt such an important meeting." "But they're making a mistake." Emma's voice rose with urgency that surprised both adults. "I found something at home last night, in Daddy's study. Papers that fell behind his big desk when I was looking for my crayon." Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride and anxiety. "What kind of papers, honey?" Emma opened her folder with careful precision, revealing several printed emails and bank documents that had somehow fallen behind Marcus's home desk and been forgotten. Her remarkable reading skills, advanced well beyond second-grade level, had allowed her to piece together fragments of a puzzle that the adults had missed. The boardroom fell silent as Emma Wellington pushed open the heavy glass door, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing mahogany table and leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. 12 of Wall Street's most powerful executives turned to stare at the 8-year-old girl who had just interrupted their deliberations with the confidence of someone 3 times her age. The air in the room was thick with tension, expensive cologne, and the weight of billion-dollar decisions. "Emma," Marcus rose from his chair, his face a mixture of surprise and mortification. "Sweetheart, you can't be in here right now. Daddy's in a very important meeting." Chairman Robert Ashford's expression darkened with irritation, his silver eyebrows drawing together like storm clouds. "Marcus, this is highly inappropriate. We're in the middle of formal proceedings that could result in criminal charges." But Emma paid no attention to the authority figures surrounding her, their expensive suits and intimidating presence meaning nothing to a child on a mission. She walked straight to her father with purpose, her manila folder clutched tightly against her chest, her young face set with determination that made several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Daddy, they're blaming you for something you didn't do," she announced, her clear voice carrying across the silent room like a bell. "I found proof that shows the bad people are lying." Patricia Chen, the CFO, leaned forward with barely concealed impatience, her red power suit seeming to glow under the boardroom's harsh lighting. "This is ridiculous. We cannot have a child disrupting—" "Wait," Marcus said, kneeling down to his daughter's level, his expensive suit creasing as he brought himself to her eye level. Something in Emma's eyes told him this wasn't a child's fantasy or attention-seeking behavior. There was a seriousness there, a gravity that reminded him of Sarah when she'd figured out complex problems. "What kind of proof, Princess?" Emma opened her folder with careful deliberation and spread several printed documents across the polished table with the precision of a seasoned investigator. Her small fingers, still bearing traces of purple marker from art class, pointed to highlighted sections with yellow highlighter that she'd applied with meticulous care. "These emails were in your study at home. They fell behind your big desk, and I found them when I dropped my crayon yesterday after school." Emma's voice grew stronger and more confident as she continued, like a lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. "Look at the times, Daddy. This email from Mrs. Chen's office came at 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday, but the big money transfer didn't happen until 3:15 p.m. The room grew deathly quiet except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 52 floors below. David Morrison, head of international operations, reached for one of the documents with trembling fingers that betrayed his usual composed demeanor. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Shanghai confirmation came after the transfer was completed. Our logs show—" Emma shook her head with the absolute certainty of a child who had spent hours studying the papers with the dedication of a detective. "No, Mr. Morrison. This paper shows Mrs. Chen's computer sent an email to the Shanghai people at 2:47, telling them the money was coming. But Daddy's computer didn't send the money until 3:15. How could Mrs. Chen know the money was coming before Daddy sent it?" Patricia Chen's face had gone ashen, her usual confident composure cracking like ice under pressure. That's not what our official logs show. There must be some mistake. But it's what this paper shows, Emma replied, holding up another document with the triumph of a child who had solved a difficult puzzle. And look at this one. It's from your computer to someone called J. Morrison, secondary temp mail, sent at 2:52 p.m. Chairman Robert Ashford's hands shook as he examined the final document Emma had placed on the table, his weathered fingers trembling as they traced the incriminating text. The 8-year-old girl stood beside her father, her innocent presence creating an almost surreal contrast to the corporate drama unfolding around her like a scene from a movie about Wall Street corruption. The paper showed a wire transfer authorization that predated Marcus's supposed transaction by 47 minutes, sent from Patricia Chen's personal access codes to an account that didn't appear in any of the official records the board had reviewed during their 3-hour deliberation. Patricia, Ashford's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 68 years of business experience and the authority of someone who had built an empire. Explain this document to me. Explain how your authorization preceded the transaction you claim Marcus initiated. The CFO's composure cracked like a dam under pressure. 20 years of carefully maintained professional facade crumbling in seconds. That's not... Someone must have fabricated these documents. This is clearly a setup to make Marcus look innocent. Emma tilted her head with the confused innocence of a child watching adults behave strangely, like when grown-ups argued about things that seemed obvious to her. But Mrs. Chen, they came from your computer, see? She pointed to the metadata at the bottom of the page with the precision of a tiny forensic accountant. Mrs. Patterson taught us how to read computer information for our research project about animals. This shows your name and your computer's special number that's like a fingerprint. David Morrison started to rise from his chair, his face pale and desperate, but Elizabeth Harper grabbed his arm with surprising strength. The compliance officer's face had gone from pale to green as she examined more of the papers, realizing that their carefully planned scheme was unraveling before their eyes. "David, don't," Harper whispered urgently, her voice carrying 23 years of legal experience and the sudden understanding that they were all going to federal prison. "They have everything. Every communication, every authorization, every piece of our plan." Marcus felt as though he was watching his life reassemble itself in real time, like a shattered mirror being put back together by invisible hands. The puzzle pieces that had made no sense 12 hours ago were clicking into place with crystal clarity, revealing a conspiracy so sophisticated that it had nearly destroyed him completely. "You planned this entire thing," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. "Patricia, David, Elizabeth, you orchestrated everything, the Shanghai steel deal, the ghost accounts, the system failures. You used my credentials, my reputation, my trust, but you made one critical mistake." "What mistake?" Chen asked desperately, her red power suit now seeming garish under the harsh boardroom lighting. Emma answered before her father could speak, her voice carrying the simple wisdom that only children possess. "You forgot that Daddy's home computer gets copies of office emails because of security rules. And you forgot that sometimes little girls find papers that fall behind big desks when they're looking for lost crayons." Chairman Ashford stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury that spoke of decades dealing with corporate corruption. "Security, please escort Ms. Chen, Mr. Morrison and Ms. Harper from the building immediately. Revoke all access credentials and secure their offices. And someone call the FBI. We have a conspiracy to uncover that goes far deeper than simple embezzlement." As chaos erupted around the boardroom, shouting, accusations, desperate explanations, and the sound of security guards responding to the emergency call, Emma slipped her small hand into her father's much larger one. She looked up at him with the satisfied expression of someone who had just solved a very important puzzle and saved the day. Are you still in trouble, Daddy? Can we go home now and have ice cream? Marcus knelt down and wrapped his daughter in the tightest hug of his life, feeling tears of relief and pride streaming down his face. No, Princess. Thanks to you, Daddy's not in trouble anymore, and yes, we can definitely have ice cream. 3 weeks after Emma's dramatic boardroom revelation, the Wellington family found themselves thrust into a media circus that transformed their quiet Greenwich, Connecticut home into ground zero for one of Wall Street's biggest scandals in decades. News vans lined their tree-lined street like mechanical vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like technological prayers for the next breaking story. Reporters camped outside their wrought iron gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the 8-year-old girl who had exposed a billion-dollar conspiracy. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching reporters interview neighbors who barely knew his name before this chaos began. His temporary suspension from Grandview Financial had been lifted with full honors, but the FBI investigation meant constant interviews, depositions, and the exhausting process of rebuilding his shattered reputation, one conversation at a time. The company had assigned him a public relations specialist and increased his security detail after receiving anonymous threats. "Daddy, why are those people still outside our house?" Emma asked, climbing onto her usual bar stool at the granite island. At 8 years old, she had become an overnight celebrity, dubbed the Little Detective by financial news outlets and featured on the cover of Time magazine as the child who exposed Wall Street corruption. Publishers were already calling with book deals, and Hollywood producers wanted to turn her story into a movie. "They want to hear our story, Princess," Marcus replied, turning from the window to face his daughter. "What you did was very brave, and it helped catch some bad people who were stealing money from lots of families. Not just ours." Sarah entered the kitchen carrying a stack of mail that had grown exponentially since the story broke. Letters from book publishers, movie producers, interview requests from major networks, and hundreds of thank you notes from Grandview Financial employees whose retirement accounts had been saved by Emma's discovery. There were also letters from other families across the country, sharing stories of loved ones who had been wrongly accused of financial crimes. "The FBI called again," Sarah announced, setting the mail on the counter with a heavy thud. "Agent Rodriguez wants to meet with Emma one more time. They think the conspiracy might be bigger than just Patricia, David, and Elizabeth. Much bigger." Marcus felt his stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. The investigation had already revealed that the 3 conspirators had stolen over $50 million across multiple schemes over the past 2 years, using sophisticated methods to frame innocent employees and cover their tracks. But federal investigators suspected their network extended beyond Grandview Financial into other major investment firms across the country. Emma looked up from her coloring book, where she was carefully shading a picture of a police officer arresting someone in a business suit. "Will I have to talk to the FBI lady again? She asks lots of hard questions that make my brain tired." "Only if you feel comfortable." "Sweetheart," Marcus said, kneeling beside her chair, "but Agent Rodriguez is one of the good guys, like you. She's trying to make sure no other daddies get blamed for things they didn't do." The kitchen phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the morning quiet like a knife. Sarah answered with the wariness that had become second nature since their lives turned upside down, always wondering if the next call would bring more trouble or relief. "Hello, yes, this is Sarah Wellington." "What? Are you certain about this? When did this happen?" "I understand. Thank you for calling us directly." She hung up with trembling hands, her face pale as morning frost, the color draining from her cheeks as she processed the information. "What is it?" Marcus asked, immediately alert to the tone that meant serious trouble was brewing. "That was Margaret from your office. Patricia Chen was found dead in her jail cell this morning. The guards are calling it an apparent suicide, but the preliminary investigation suggests it might not have been." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "They think someone silenced her before she could reveal more names." Emma stopped coloring, her young mind processing the gravity of the conversation with the sharp intelligence that had saved her father's career and exposed the conspiracy. Does this mean the bad people are trying to stop Mrs. Chen from telling more secrets about other bad people? Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look of profound concern and growing fear. Their 8-year-old daughter had just articulated what federal investigators were likely thinking. Someone was systematically silencing witnesses to protect a much larger criminal operation that reached far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. "I think," Marcus said slowly, his voice heavy with the realization of what this meant for their family, "we might need to ask for federal protection. This is much bigger and more dangerous than we thought." Federal agent Elena Rodriguez sat across from the Wellington family in their living room, her dark eyes serious as she reviewed a thick file that had grown substantially thicker since Patricia Chen's suspicious death 3 days earlier. At 45, Rodriguez had spent 20 years investigating white-collar crime for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. But the Grandview financial case was proving to be one of the most complex and far-reaching conspiracies she'd ever encountered in her distinguished career. "Mr. Wellington, I need you to understand that Patricia Chen's death has fundamentally changed everything about this investigation," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many witnesses disappear before they could testify. "The preliminary autopsy suggests she was murdered using a method designed to look like suicide. Someone with sophisticated knowledge of forensic science wanted her silenced permanently." Emma sat between her parents on the leather sofa, her small hands folded in her lap with unusual stillness. Since becoming the key witness in a federal investigation, she had developed a maturity that both impressed and worried the adults around her. The carefree 8-year-old, who had crawled under a desk looking for a crayon, was now carrying the weight of exposing a criminal empire. "What kind of network are we talking about?" Marcus asked. Though part of him wasn't sure, he wanted to know the answer that might endanger his family further. Rodriguez opened her file and spread several photographs across the coffee table, revealing a complex web of connections that looked like something from a spy thriller. "We believe Patricia, David, and Elizabeth were part of a sophisticated financial crime syndicate that has been operating across multiple investment firms for at least 5 years. They weren't just stealing money. They were systematically destroying innocent executives to cover their tracks and create promotion opportunities for their criminal associates." Sarah leaned forward, studying the photographs with growing alarm and recognition. Some of the faces looked familiar from financial news reports and industry conferences. "You mean Marcus wasn't their first victim? Other families have gone through this nightmare?" "Far from their first," Rodriguez confirmed grimly. "We've now identified at least 12 other executives at major firms who were terminated or imprisoned under suspicious circumstances over the past 5 years. In each case, the accusations were followed by rapid promotions for individuals who we now know were connected to this criminal network." Emma raised her small hand like she was in school, causing Rodriguez to smile despite the serious circumstances surrounding their conversation. "Yes, Emma? Agent Rodriguez, if the bad people were doing this to lots of daddies, why didn't anyone notice the pattern before I found those papers?" The question demonstrated the kind of logical thinking that had made Emma's discovery so remarkable and had started this entire investigation. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Marcus before answering, impressed by the child's analytical mind. "That's exactly the right question, Emma. The reason no one noticed is that these crimes were spread across different companies in different cities over several years. It's like if someone stole one cookie from 12 different cookie jars instead of stealing 12 cookies from one jar. Nobody noticed the pattern until you found those papers and started asking the right questions." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. How many people are we talking about? How big is this criminal organization? Based on our investigation so far, we estimate at least 30 to 40 individuals across major financial centers: New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, and even some international connections. They have people inside law enforcement agencies, regulatory offices, and even some federal positions. Rodriguez's expression grew even more serious. Which is why I need to discuss immediate protection for your family. Protection? Sarah's voice rose with alarm. You think we're in actual physical danger? Mrs. Wellington, your daughter single-handedly exposed a criminal enterprise worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Patricia Chen was murdered because she was going to reveal names, bank account numbers, and operational details. These people have already killed once to protect their secret, and they won't hesitate to kill again. Emma looked up at Agent Rodriguez with the directness that had become her trademark throughout this ordeal. Are you saying the bad people want to hurt me because I found their secret papers behind Daddy's desk? Rodriguez knelt down to Emma's eye level, her professional demeanor softening into something more maternal and protective. Emma, I'm not going to lie to you because you're smart enough to understand the truth. Yes, there are some very bad people who are angry about what you discovered, but there are also a lot of good people, like me and my team, who are going to make sure you and your family stay completely safe. The safe house in rural Virginia looked nothing like the Wellington family's elegant Connecticut home with its manicured gardens and sophisticated decor. Hidden among rolling hills and surrounded by federal agents disguised as farmhands and maintenance workers, the modest ranch house had become their temporary prison and sanctuary simultaneously. 2 months had passed since they'd entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, and the isolation was beginning to take its toll on everyone, especially 8-year-old Emma, who missed her normal life desperately. I miss my room with the purple walls, Emma said quietly, staring out the window at the unfamiliar landscape of cornfields and distant mountains. And I miss Mrs. Patterson and my friends at school. Do you think they know why I haven't been back? Do they think I forgot about them? Marcus sat beside his daughter on the worn sofa, his heart breaking at the innocence lost in her voice and the weight of responsibility she carried. The girl who had bravely walked into a boardroom to save his career was now paying the price for her courage in ways no child should have to endure. He had gained 20 pounds from stress eating, and Sarah had developed insomnia that kept her awake most nights. The FBI told your school that you're helping with something very important for the country, he said softly, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders. Mrs. Patterson knows you're safe, and she's proud of how brave you've been. She sends her love through Agent Rodriguez. Agent Rodriguez had visited 6 times in the past 2 months, each visit bringing updates on the expanding investigation that seemed to grow larger and more complex every week. The financial crime network had grown beyond their wildest estimates. Over 60 individuals across 15 states, with connections reaching into federal regulatory agencies, congressional offices, and even some international banking institutions. Sarah entered the living room, carrying her laptop, her face grim with new information from her secure video call. I just got off a call with Rodriguez. They've made 14 more arrests this week, including 2 people in the Treasury Department, but they've also discovered something more troubling than we expected. More troubling than people actively trying to kill our daughter? Marcus asked with bitter irony, his voice tight with the strain of months in hiding. The network has been actively searching for us, using resources we didn't know they had access to. They've hired private investigators, computer hackers, and even some corrupt law enforcement officials from multiple agencies. Rodriguez says they're getting increasingly desperate because Emma's testimony is the key to prosecuting the entire organization and recovering billions in stolen funds. Emma looked up from her coloring book, where she'd been drawing pictures of their old house with remarkable detail for someone so young, including the exact placement of furniture and the colors of her bedroom walls. Mommy, are the bad people still angry at me for finding their secrets? Before Sarah could answer, the secure phone rang, a sound that always made their hearts skip because it represented their only connection to the outside world and news about their future. Marcus answered with the caution that had become second nature over months of isolation. "This is Rodriguez," came the familiar voice through the encrypted line. "I have significant news, and some of it is very good. We've located the primary financial records hidden in offshore accounts across 7 countries. Emma's discovery led us to over $400 million in stolen funds that we're returning to victims." "And the bad news?" Marcus asked, recognizing the tone of someone delivering mixed information. "We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something major for next week. We don't know exactly what, but they're running out of time before the grand jury testimony begins in federal court. They know that once Emma testifies publicly, their entire organization will be exposed and destroyed forever." Emma walked over to her father, her small hand tugging at his sleeve with the determination that had become familiar. "Daddy, can I talk to Agent Rodriguez? I have something important to ask." Marcus hesitated, but handed her the phone. Emma's voice was clear and determined as she spoke with the confidence that had carried her through this entire ordeal. "Agent Rodriguez, this is Emma. I have a very important question for you." "Hi, Emma, sweetheart. What's your question?" "If I testify in court and tell everyone what I found behind Daddy's desk, will the bad people stop trying to hurt other families? Will other little girls' daddies be safe from being blamed for things they didn't do?" The phone was silent for a long moment before Rodriguez responded, her voice thick with emotion and respect for the child's selfless concern. "Yes, Emma. Your testimony will save many families and put these criminals in federal prison for the rest of their lives." Emma nodded with the serious determination that had become her trademark. "Then I want to testify. I want to help stop them from hurting anyone else." The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan had been transformed into an impenetrable fortress for Emma Wellington's testimony, with security measures typically reserved for national security cases. Metal detectors, armed federal marshals, bulletproof glass, and plainclothes agents created multiple layers of protection around the 8-year-old girl who was about to bring down a criminal empire that had operated in shadows for over a decade. The media presence was unprecedented. Every major news network had crews stationed outside, while inside, the gallery was packed with federal prosecutors, defense attorneys, family members of victims, and financial industry leaders. Emma sat in the witness chair, a special booster seat allowing her to see over the wooden rail, her small hands folded carefully in her lap. She wore her best dress, navy blue with white trim that Sarah had bought specially for this historic day, and her auburn hair was pulled back with a ribbon that matched her outfit perfectly. Despite the formal setting and the enormous weight of the moment, she maintained the composure that had amazed adults throughout this extraordinary ordeal. "Emma," began Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Stevens, his voice gentle but clear enough to reach every corner of the packed courtroom, "can you tell the jury how you found the papers that started this massive investigation?" "I was in Daddy's study at home, looking for my purple crayon that rolled under his big wooden desk," Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom's sophisticated sound system. "When I crawled under there on my hands and knees, I saw some papers stuck behind the desk. They had fallen down through a crack, and nobody knew they were there for who knows how long." In the defendant's section, David Morrison and Elizabeth Harper sat with their expensive attorneys, their faces grim and desperate as they listened to the testimony that would likely send them to federal prison for the rest of their lives. Patricia Chen's conspicuously empty chair served as a stark reminder of how far this conspiracy was willing to go to protect itself and silence witnesses. "What made you think these papers were important enough to show your parents?" Stevens continued with careful patience. Emma's response demonstrated the remarkable intelligence and attention to detail that had first alerted her to the conspiracy. "Mrs. Patterson teaches us in school to read very carefully and ask questions when things don't make sense or seem wrong." The times written on the papers didn't match what the grown-ups were saying happened with Daddy's work. Defense attorney Robert Hawkins, representing Morrison, stood for cross-examination. At 62, Hawkins was known throughout New York for his aggressive courtroom tactics, but approaching an 8-year-old witness required a delicate touch that seemed to challenge his usual intimidating courtroom persona significantly. "Emma, isn't it possible you misunderstood what you were reading? These are very complicated financial documents with technical language that even adults find difficult to understand." Emma tilted her head with the same thoughtful expression she'd shown in the Grandview boardroom months earlier. "Mr. Hawkins, I can read very well for my age. Mrs. Patterson says I read at a middle school level, and I know how to tell time perfectly. The papers showed Mrs. Chen's computer sending emails at 2:47 p.m. before Daddy's computer did anything at 3:15 p.m. That's like saying someone answered the phone before it even rang." The simplicity and unshakable logic of her explanation caused several jurors to nod in understanding, while others leaned forward with increased attention. Hawkins tried a different approach, hoping to find some weakness in her testimony. "Emma, did anyone help you understand these papers? Did your father or mother explain them to you?" "No, sir," Emma replied firmly, her voice growing stronger. "Daddy was at my school concert that Tuesday night when these papers printed at our house. He never saw them until I brought them to his work on Thursday. I figured it out all by myself because Mrs. Patterson taught us to be good detectives when we read things." Stevens returned for redirect examination, presenting Emma with enlarged copies of the key documents projected on large screens throughout the courtroom for everyone to see clearly. "Emma, can you show the jury the specific times that made you realize something was very wrong?" Emma stood up confidently in her chair, pointing to the highlighted sections she had marked with yellow highlighter months earlier. "This email from Mrs. Chen says 2:47 p.m., telling the Shanghai people that money was coming to them soon. But this other paper shows Daddy's computer didn't send any money until 3:15 p.m. Mrs. Chen knew the money was coming before Daddy sent it, which means she was part of planning it." The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for the quiet hum of air conditioning, as the implications of an 8-year-old's crystal-clear logic dismantled months of sophisticated legal preparation by the defense teams. "And this email," Emma continued, pointing to another document with the confidence of a seasoned prosecutor, "was sent to Mr. Morrison's secret email address at 2:52 p.m. It says, 'Package delivered as discussed. Wellington will take the fall as planned.' That means they plan to blame my daddy for something he didn't do." 6 months after Emma's devastating courthouse testimony, the Wellington family finally returned to their Connecticut home, but the familiar surroundings felt strangely different after their extended absence. The media attention had died down to a manageable level, though occasional interview requests still arrived in their mailbox alongside hundreds of thank-you letters from families whose lives had been saved by the investigation Emma had triggered. The house itself seemed smaller somehow, as if their experiences had changed their perspective on everything they once took for granted. Marcus stood in his restored study, looking at the exact spot behind his mahogany desk where a curious 8-year-old had found the papers that changed not only their lives, but the entire financial industry. The FBI had returned all his personal documents after months of evidence analysis, and Grandview Financial had not only reinstated him with full honors, but promoted him to senior vice president, with a substantial salary increase that reflected his newfound status as a corporate hero and integrity champion. "Daddy, look what came in the mail today," Emma called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the excitement that had slowly returned as their lives normalized and the threats disappeared. Emma entered the study carrying a large envelope with the official seal of the United States Department of Justice, her eyes bright with curiosity. At 9 years old now, her birthday had passed quietly during witness protection, she had grown noticeably taller and maintained the intelligent curiosity that had made her discovery possible, though she now approached mysterious papers and documents with considerably more caution and adult supervision. "What do you think it is, Princess?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew based on a phone call he'd received from Agent Rodriguez the previous week. Emma opened the envelope carefully and pulled out an official certificate with gold lettering, an embossed seal, and the signature of the Attorney General of the United States. Her eyes widened as she read the formal language with the advanced reading skills that had first allowed her to decode the criminal conspiracy. "It's a Presidential Citizen's Medal for exceptional service," she read slowly and carefully. "For exceptional service to the nation in exposing financial crimes and protecting innocent families from fraud and corruption." She looked up at her father with genuine wonder. "Daddy, does this mean the President of the United States knows about what I did?" "It means the President thinks you're a national hero, sweetheart, and so do millions of other people across the country." Sarah joined them in the study, carrying the morning newspaper with a headline that made them all smile with satisfaction. "Financial Crime Network receives maximum sentences. Judge calls case unprecedented in scope." The article detailed the final sentencing of the 37 individuals who had been convicted based on the evidence Emma's discovery had uncovered through months of investigation. "David Morrison got 25 years in federal prison," Sarah read aloud with satisfaction. "Elizabeth Harper received 22 years, and they've recovered over $600 million in stolen funds that will be returned to the companies and families who were victimized by this massive conspiracy." Emma studied the newspaper article with the same careful attention she had given to those fateful papers behind the desk months earlier. "So no more daddies will get blamed for things they didn't do." "No more daddies," Marcus confirmed with certainty. "The bad people are going to jail for a very long time, and new rules have been put in place by the government to prevent this from ever happening again." The study phone rang, and Marcus answered to find Agent Rodriguez on the line, with news that would officially complete their remarkable journey. "Marcus, I wanted to personally inform you that the last member of the network was arrested this morning in Switzerland. The investigation is officially closed, and your family is no longer under any threat whatsoever." When Marcus shared the news, Emma's response was characteristically direct and practical. "Does this mean I can go back to Mrs. Patterson's class and see my friends? I miss learning about new things and playing at recess." "Yes, Princess. You can go back to being a regular kid who doesn't have to worry about criminals or testifying in court." Emma considered this announcement for a moment with the seriousness that had become her trademark throughout this ordeal. "But Daddy, I learned that sometimes kids have to do grown-up things to help their families and other people, and sometimes finding the truth is more important than being safe or comfortable." Marcus knelt down and hugged his daughter tightly, marveling at the profound wisdom contained in someone so young who had faced down a criminal empire and won. "You're absolutely right, Emma, but I hope you never have to be that brave again." "Me too," Emma replied thoughtfully. "But if I do have to be brave again, I'll be ready because you and Mommy taught me to always do the right thing." 1 year later, Emma Wellington stood at the podium in the Harvard Business School auditorium, looking out at an audience of MBA students, professors, business leaders, and financial journalists who had come to hear from the now famous financial detective. At 9 years old, she had become one of the youngest people ever invited to speak at the prestigious institution where her father had earned his MBA degree 22 years earlier. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on video screens in adjacent halls. "My name is Emma Wellington, and I'm in 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary School," she began, her voice clear and confident through the sophisticated microphone system. "A year and a half ago, I was just a regular kid looking for my purple crayon under my daddy's desk. I didn't know that finding some papers would change so many lives and help catch criminals who were hurting families." The audience of brilliant minds listened with rapt attention as Emma told her story with the same directness and honesty that had first exposed the conspiracy. She spoke about the importance of reading carefully, asking questions when things don't make sense, and having the courage to speak up even when adults don't want to listen or believe you. Marcus watched from the front row, his heart swelling with enormous pride as his daughter addressed some of the brightest business minds in the world. Beside him sat Agent Rodriguez, who had become a close family friend, and Margaret Kim, his loyal assistant who had witnessed Emma's first dramatic entrance into the Grandview financial boardroom that changed everything. "Mrs. Patterson, my teacher, says that honesty is like a bright light that makes dark places visible," Emma continued with the wisdom of someone far beyond her years. "When I found those papers behind Daddy's desk, there were a lot of people hiding in dark places, doing bad things to families like mine, and stealing money that didn't belong to them. The papers helped turn on the light so everyone could see the truth clearly. In the months since the conspiracy's complete exposure and prosecution, Emma had received over 10,000 letters from children and adults around the world. Some were from families of executives who had been wrongly accused and later vindicated based on the new investigation protocols Emma's case had inspired. Others were from children who had been encouraged to speak up about problems they noticed in their own communities, schools, and families. I learned that sometimes grown-ups make honest mistakes, and sometimes grown-ups do bad things on purpose to hurt other people," Emma said, her voice taking on the mature tone that had developed through her extraordinary experiences. "But I also learned that there are always more good people than bad people in the world, and the good people will help you if you're brave enough to tell the truth, even when it's scary." The question and answer session that followed demonstrated Emma's remarkable ability to distill complex financial concepts into simple, understandable terms that even children could grasp. When a Harvard professor asked about the psychological impact of her experience, Emma's response was characteristically direct and thoughtful. "Professor Williams, being scared is normal when you're doing something important that might be dangerous. But my daddy taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared at all. It means you do the right thing to help people even when you are scared, because helping others is more important than being comfortable." After the presentation, as Emma signed copies of the children's book that had been written about her story, a young MBA student approached with a question that would stay with her for years to come. "Emma, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Emma considered the question with the careful thought she applied to all important matters in her life. "I think I want to be an FBI agent like Agent Rodriguez, or maybe a teacher like Mrs. Patterson, who helps kids learn to read and think carefully. But mostly, I want to help people find the truth when it's hidden in dark places by bad people." As the family drove back to Connecticut that evening, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, clutching her Presidential Citizen's Medal and a new set of colored pencils, a gift from Harvard Business School that included notably several purple crayons. "Do you think she'll remember all of this when she's older?" Sarah asked quietly, watching their daughter sleep peacefully. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror at his sleeping daughter, the girl who had saved his career and exposed one of the largest financial conspiracies in history by simply being curious, careful, and brave enough to speak the truth. "I think Emma Wellington will remember that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're just looking for something small and ordinary," he replied thoughtfully. "And I think she'll remember that telling the truth, no matter how scary it might be, can change the world and save innocent people from terrible injustice." The little girl who had crawled under a desk looking for a crayon had grown up to become exactly what the world needed. Someone who would never stop asking questions, never stop looking for truth, and never stop believing that good people working together can always overcome those who choose to hide in the darkness and hurt others.